Before we were married, one day I was driving to Laura's house and I had two things on my mind that I needed to do before I got there. The first was to put some petrol in the car. The second was I wanted to buy her some flowers to show her just how much I loved her. Fortunately, petrol stations are a convenient one-stop shop for both things, and so I swung into this petrol station, filled up the tank with petrol, and as I was running in to pay, grabbed a beautiful bunch of flowers from the forecourt. They were purple, which is her favourite colour, or one of at least, and they had these droplets of water on. They just looked so fresh because they'd just been watered and cared for, and so that was the bunch that I picked. I drove around to Laura's house, rang the doorbell, and there were nanoseconds between her opening the door and asking me the question, "What are those?" And, listener, despite the fact that my heart was in the right place, despite the fact that my motivation was to show love, what I'd actually done was to pick up a really tacky bunch of plastic flowers. It wasn't water that had been freshly, lovingly sprayed on them that I saw. It was little bits of plastic bead that had been glued to them to make it look like water. And anyway, they went into the recycling fairly quickly, because you can recycle flowers when they're plastic. This week we're going to carry on learning in our big story about Moses, and over the next few weeks we're going to see Moses grow and develop, and we're going to see how his motivation and his actions begin to intertwine. He doesn't always get it right, but his heart is often in a good place, and we're going to see him grow and develop and be refined over time, and it's going to be exciting. And it starts off with this: Moses, who, remember, grew through some kind of miraculous intervention in Pharaoh's daughter's household, grew up with this dual personality. He knows he's a Hebrew, he knows he's from the Israelite family, but he also knows that he has this incredible privilege of having been brought up and raised as an Egyptian in the royal palace. One day he's wandering around and he sees an Egyptian slave driver whipping and beating a Hebrew slave. And something inside of him, as he wrestles with this dual personality that he has, just flips. And he has a heart and a motivation for justice and rightness and fairness and goodness and peace. And he just can't take it, what he sees in front of him. So he jumps into the middle of this argument. He stops the slave driver whipping the Israelite slave. And in fact, he's so angry about this injustice that he kills the Egyptian slave driver, which isn't good. He realizes it isn't good straight away, and so to cover up what he's done, he buries this Egyptian slave driver in the sand, and he hopes it will go away. The next day, as he's wandering around, maybe thinking what he's done, he sees another fight taking place. Only this time it's between two Hebrews, two Israelites, two slaves, and they are fighting and arguing, and they're having this big old ruckus. Again, Moses, who cares about rightness and fairness and justice and peace, doesn't like what he's seeing, and so he wades into the middle of this argument and he says, guys, what are you doing? And he pushes them apart. You gotta stop. And one of them turns to him and says, yeah, or else what? You're gonna kill one of us too? And Moses, in that moment, realizes that the secret that he'd hoped he'd buried is in fact common knowledge. In fact, it's so common knowledge that Pharaoh himself soon learns about it and desires retribution, and he wants to kill Moses to make amends. So Moses has got no other option but to leg it. He legs it into the desert. He goes to a place called Midian, which is on the other side of the Red Sea from Egypt, and he stays there. One day he's in the desert and he's sat down by this well. We've had wells crop up in the story before, and these shepherdesses come with their sheep that they're caring for their father, and they seek to water the sheep and to give them, not to make them grow because you can't grow sheep, to give them water so that they can drink. As they're doing that, this bunch of likely lad male shepherds, bit fooling around, they all come over and they start pushing the shepherdesses out the way, throwing their weight around, stealing the water, doing stuff that boys think is funny. And in fact, it gets to a stage where Moses, who's been watching this, says, I can't take it anymore. My heart is for justice and for rightness and for goodness and for peace and for fairness. So he wades into the middle of this argument too, and he sends those Joker Boy shepherds packing. The shepherdesses, the sisters, they go home and they tell their dad what's happened, and he says, you got to invite this guy in. So they do. And Moses stays with them for another 40 years. In fact, he marries one of those daughters, and they live together, and he spends 40 years working there in the desert, looking after sheep who are wandering around, caring for their needs and making sure they're okay. Spoiler alert, it isn't going to be the last time that he does that. So, at the end of these stories each week, so often I say what I think we're learning, but what do I know about it? We're going to throw it into some breakout rooms now, where we get to share what we're noticing and what we're learning through this big story. So you can talk about anything that you've noticed. What does this story make you think? How does it make you feel about yourself? What do you learn about God through what we're learning in this big story? Here are some other questions though. Have you, as you look back on your life, done something with great intentions, but if you look back on it now, you'd think, oh, given what I know now, I'd do it differently? What is it, question number 2, what is it that just gets your juices flowing? What gets your blood pumping? What gets your heart? What is it that when you see it, you're excited or stirred up or motivated about jumping into headlong? Maybe it's justice, maybe it's hospitality, maybe it's caring for people, maybe it's working amongst children or the elderly, maybe it could be peace, it could be anything. What is it? Kids, teenagers, you know this. You know this at a really young age, and often you're made to think that, oh, I can't do anything about that because I'm too young. Nonsense. Don't leave it to the adults. You know what you get really excited about. You've got a hunch already, I know, about what you're really passionate about it. Share it with other people. It might be that you can look at other people in your breakout group and say, I noticed this about you. I noticed that you're brilliant at this. I'm wondering if that's the thing that God has put in your character and your makeup to use. Here's another one. Is there something that is holding you back? Because you'd love to jump into some issue, but you wonder if you might get it wrong and do it the wrong way like Moses started doing. And so you hold back out of fear of doing the wrong thing in the right arena, as it were. Throw these things around in your breakout rooms for a couple of minutes, and then I'll bring us all back. But remember, you're a key part of the big story of God, which keeps on going.